Can everyone see the screen now pretty well and see me at the same time? Excellent, beautiful.
Yep.
All right. So let's get right to it. First, start a little bit overview of Scrum at Scale. Scrum at Scale, lightweight scaling framework invented by Dr. Jeff Sutherland, who's one of the co-founders of and creators of Scrum. Through years of research on making Scrum work since, I guess he started in the late 80s, early 90s is when he started playing with it. He got 95 Scrum itself got presented at UPSLA, and all that predates the Agile Manifesto, as they were some of the signers of the Agile Manifesto. So the whole point of Scrum at Scale is how can we take what Scrum is, which is a minimum viable bureaucracy for a single team, and scale it in a way that we maintain the strengths of Scrum without losing it. Because what happens with most organizations when they scale is a lot of bureaucracy sets in. There's a lot of reduction in productivity because of all the extra coordination you need to do. So we designed Scrum at Scale so you don't have that. And the two key parts of Scrum at Scale is its components. The scaling components, which are 12 components that describe what good organizations need to do in order to execute a scaling model. And it's a non-prescriptive because these components are actually defined as, for those who are object-oriented programmers, they're abstract classes. In other words, they just define the goals, inputs, and outputs. They don't describe the implementation of the various techniques. So if your organization is already good at creating strategic vision, however they do it, you don't need to change it to do Scrum at Scale. Just keep doing what you're doing. If you struggle with backlog prioritization, then you need to improve that piece, and there are patterns and techniques that we can teach you or that they describe within Scrum and Scrum at Scale in order to improve that. But if you have a way to do it, then you don't have to do it the way the way Scrum at Scale recommends. So it's a very non-prescriptive framework. So it's both the strength and weaknesses, right? As a strength, you don't have to change everything in your organization to do Scrum at Scale. Weakness, though, is if you really want to have a very specific way to do everything, Scrum at Scale doesn't necessarily lead to that because it doesn't believe in the really big bang approach. It really is about iteratively and incrementally improving your organization, just like we iteratively and incrementally deliver products. Okay. The second key thing about Scrum at Scale is how it actually scales. It scales by creating a dynamic network of stable teams. By doing this, it becomes a scale-free network. We've had several customers who, even though they're scaling, they have multiple teams working on the same product, they actually see linear scalability. They actually see the performance of the combined equal or be better than the sum of the parts. And you rarely see that when you scale large organizations because there's usually lots of communication. But because these are very dynamic teams and they're stable teams, they can connect and reconnect as needed when they need to collaborate. So that there's not a lot of overhead in meetings. When you need to collaborate, the teams come together, they collaborate, they function as kind of a global Scrum team with the various events like scale daily scrums and scaled sprint reviews. And then when they no longer need to collaborate to deliver something, then they can disconnect and reconnect with other teams. So that's kind of how that scaling works. Very dynamic. Now, most organizations, they struggle to be agile. And there are four primary reasons that we've seen in the years that I've been doing this, that I've seen organizations struggle. First is many organizations have an inability to prioritize their work. Everything is number one, right? Most people are assigned to 2, 3, 4 projects, right? They even though they have limited resources, they can't say no to anything. So they constantly take on more work and they find themselves in a quandary where everyone's working on so many things, they can't focus. They can't focus on getting anything done. Have any of you lived in an environment like that? Do most people live in an environment like that? Probably, right? Um, so one of the things that you need to solve is that. So the second thing that most organizations, large organizations, struggle with is the ability to deliver frequently. Right? Scrum asks you to create a product increment, a working product increment every sprint. A lot of organizations struggle with that. Right now, with DevOps, things are getting a lot easier, but there's still a lot of organizations who haven't implemented DevOps properly or at all. They still don't deliver immediately. And if you do things like hardware or other kinds of services, they don't deliver frequently enough. So without that, you don't have the feedback loop. That feedback loop, which can teach you how to build a better product or give you guidance on how to build a product. So that's a struggle if you can't deliver fast enough, particularly if you can't deliver high quality working products fast enough. The third biggest issue is the ability to refactor the organization to take advantage of opportunities. I already mentioned, based on the number one, that they already have too much work anyway. But because most organizations are structured as a hierarchy, and fairly static hierarchy, they struggle to get a team together to deliver quickly on opportunities that might come up. Have you noticed that in some of your companies? New opportunity comes up, they can't get the people on that fast enough, right? It takes them 3 months just to get the teams going. By the time they get it going, the opportunity has gone by, or somebody else has jumped on top of it. I mean, it's hard to be agile if it takes months to actually jump onto an opportunity, right? The whole point about being agile is to quickly take advantage of market changes and opportunities that come up. So it's important that we allow that refactoring. And the last one is around decision making. A lot of organizations have a hard time making decisions quickly. Every major decision has to be run up the flagpole, has to go up multiple levels. It could take weeks to get a major decision. Like, how many of you are in organizations that can make a decision quickly, like within 2 hours, they can have a major decision made? Is that possible? A week, maybe? 2 weeks sometimes? Yeah, this could be pretty terrible thing, because again, as decisions go up the flagpole.
Isn't the light still on?
What's that, Rick?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. As decisions go up the flagpole, the information needed to make the decision doesn't go up with it typically, right? So they're often making a decision in a vacuum and have to ask for reports or ask for people to come present. And then because people are presenting to senior management, this odd behavior of green shifting occurs. Are you familiar with green shifting? So green shifting is, as a message, particularly a status message, travels up the organization, it shifts greener and greener. So at the very bottom, it might be red. Like this, we have no idea how we're going to solve this problem. And then it goes up a layer and says they're working hard to solve this problem. And then it goes up a layer and it says they'll have this problem solved next week. And then by the time the senior leadership, oh, we have it under control, don't worry about it. And so now when they have to make a decision, they don't know there's a problem going on, right? Because they haven't heard the real transparent story, because people are afraid to share bad news. And that can be exacerbated if you have leadership that punishes the messenger, right? So it's kind of important to deal with that. So let me show you a study that was done by the Standish Group and the Chaos Report, that they correlated the time it takes to make decisions with project success. And if you can make major decisions in an hour or less, the chart on the far right there can describes what the success rate is. Almost 60% of the projects are successful. But if decisions take even as little as more than 5 hours, just 5 hours, not 5 days, not 5 weeks, we're talking about 5 hours, okay? The success rate gets cut by 2/3. The failure rate gets tripled if you can't make decisions quickly. So have you noticed that? I mean, issues where people have a hard time making decisions and what that might cause issues, where people end up doing the wrong thing or not actually working on stuff because they just They're waiting for a decision to be made.
I see that a lot.
You do, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, teams will start building the wrong thing if they haven't gotten a decision. So then it just snowballs.
Exactly. They got to rework, tear out the old code, put in new code, whatever else. Yep, exactly. It's not a happy situation. All right. So let me go back to Scrum Scale. So Scrum Scale tries to solve many of these problems. Scrum itself, if you're doing Agile properly, solves a lot of these problems. But let me tell you how Scrum Scale solves it. So talked about the 12 components here. They divide it into 2 cycles. The product owner cycle, which focuses on the prioritization of the initiatives in the organization, breaking those down to the small enough chunks so that a dynamic network of teams can actually pull the work and deliver on that work. That's what that red cycle's about, right? Where the team of product owners in the organization are following this cycle so that we can quickly get the organization backlog reprioritized and then get the teams working on the right high value things quickly. And the black cycle is what's called the Scrum Master cycle. It focuses on how we deliver. It focuses on things like continuous improvement, impediment removal, cross-team coordination, improving the delivery cycle. This is where DevOps would come in, getting feedback. And at the center of the 2 cycles are 2 executive teams. One, the Executive MetaScrum, focuses on the prioritization and strategic vision of the whole organization, right? They're basically the product owners of the organization. And then the center of the Scrum Master loop is the Executive Action Team, and they're responsible for clearing out the bureaucracy, the waste, the things that slow teams down. That's what they're responsible for, okay? Now, at the top center here, I don't know if I can, right there, is the team process. This is where Scrum happens. But like I said, this is a fairly non-prescriptive framework. All the goal says is that the team needs to be able to deliver value quickly, create a flow of value, and it doesn't specifically say you have to use Scrum. It's implied that you'll be using Scrum there because this is Scrum at scale, but you don't have to use Scrum. You can use Kanban or other techniques. If you have a technique that is delivering value quickly with high quality, by all means, continue doing it, and let's fix the organization around it so that the whole organization could be aligned for making this work. Okay. Now, the heart of Scrum at scale, and when you want to start by getting these 3 components working well. Right, the team level process. We gotta get the teams doing Scrum well or doing some form of Agile delivery that works well. Because scaling something that works poorly is disastrous, right? It actually exacerbates the problem. So any little problem that one team is having gets exacerbated when you have multiple teams doing it and replicating it, right? So we really want to get good Scrum or good Agile working on that team. Then you need executive cover. You need an executive action team, which is as you want to get as high in the organization as you can get that are authorized to eliminate systemic impediments, eliminate bureaucracy, eliminate things that could that slow teams down. And then you need an executive team that is willing to make the hard call to prioritize the organizational initiatives in an event called the Executive MetaScrum, where they actually talk about, at the very high level, what is the important projects, initiatives, products that are happening in the organization. And they need to decide which of those is number 1, which of those is number 2, which of those is number 3, not what are the top priorities. What is the numbers 1 to N? The last organization I've worked with, they had 100 major initiatives and they were all ordered 1 to 100. They knew exactly what number 5 was. They knew exactly what number 1 was. So when there was a conflict where 2 projects had to use some central function could just look at the priority and say, you win, you're number 2, they're number 6. We're going to do number 2 first, because that's what the organizational priority states. And that's what these 3 these three groups have to be put in place first. And then the other components can be adjusted accordingly as you need to in order to improve your organization as we iteratively and incrementally evolve and improve your company. Now, one of the key things that I always stress when I start coaching an organization is we're not going to get rid of the hierarchy. Just not going to happen, particularly a large organization. They're not going to get rid of the hierarchy. The hierarchy is needed for stability. It's been there a long time. There's a strong self-preservation mechanism in organizations that makes it difficult to say we're going to eliminate that, and we're not going to eliminate that. So this dual operating model that I'm showing here comes out of work by John Carter. I don't know if people are familiar with John Carter. He's a big change leadership person. He wrote a paper in Harvard Business Review called Accelerate, and then he had a book called Accelerate, which talks about this dual operating model. And basically postulates that all startup companies, all companies when they first start are networks. They're collections of people and teams that are doing anything they can to get stuff done, to deliver products and deliver value. But as they grow, they start putting structures in place to add stability, right? They have customers to protect, they have revenue to protect. So the hierarchy gets entrenched and gets stronger and more rigid, and then the network eventually goes away because the entrepreneurs tend to mess up the hierarchy all that much. The people in the company start to really distrust those in the network. So the network eventually goes away. But then the hierarchy finds that they can't keep up with change in the marketplace. Now, long time ago, 50 years ago, the world was changing fairly slowly. It was probably okay. But now the world is changing so fast that it's really hard to keep up if you're a hierarchy. So he postulates the way to do this is to start introducing the network again, right? And the way we talk about it is we create this dual operating model where the Scrum at scale is being executed in the network. So people live in both the network and the hierarchy. The hierarchy's responsibility now is really around the stability, resource management, mentorship standards, but they're not responsible for delivery of projects that need agility, right? Those are sent to the network, and the network is responsible for delivering on these things. And it's where agility happens. These teams are cross-functional. In other words, each of these teams includes representation from across the hierarchy, right? There's a guiding coalition in the center, and that's the EAT and EMS that we talked about earlier, the Executive Action Team and the Executive MetaScrum that we talked about earlier. They're the guiding coalition. They guide what the priorities of the projects are, and they guide on how we're going to minimize the bureaucracy, minimize the impedance mismatch between these teams so the teams can actually get work done quickly. So this is really a key point, and I find that it also helps organizations where people who are comfortable with the hierarchy, knowing that we're not dismantling the hierarchy, they feel more comfortable bringing this in. So we mentioned how this is making it stick. A lot of times you'll see the corporate antibodies jump on agile transformations because they're afraid that they're going to lose something. They're going to lose their position power. They're going to lose the hierarchy. They're going to lose something, right? By saying we're going to maintain the hierarchy, we're just going to change kind of what it focuses on and allow the product delivery to go into the network actually helps the corporate antibody stay at bay a little bit. That makes sense? Any questions on that? No? Yes? John, no? Good? All right.
I
Excellent.
was wondering if, so you've seen this work?
Yes.
The hierarchy, okay.
Yeah. Yep. In the last 4 years, I've implemented this at 3 different companies, and it's worked really well.
With the dual operating model specifically.
Dual operating model, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Because the hierarchy is really not good at doing anything with Agile, right? Because it just takes too long to get anything done. It really does, right? And then there's turf fighting and protectionism and all kinds of stuff that happens in the hierarchy. So where the company starts to actually compete against itself, right? Because they're competing for limited budgets and things of that nature. And what we want to do in the network is, in the network, there's only 3 roles. Anyone guess what those 3 roles are?
Some version of PO, Scrum Master, and team member.
That's it. Those are the only 3 roles, right? So we don't want to deal with a lot of power struggles there. We just say we're creating these teams. The product owner is the one who orders the backlog, right? Scrum Master eliminates the waste and helps teams coordinate. And the delivery teams, the developers, they actually develop the value. And it's a cross-functional team. We take people from across the hierarchy and put them on the same team so that they can have all the skills necessary to deliver things to the marketplace. And the more they can make that happen, the faster they can get things out the door. Okay. Key concept. All right. Now the executive action team, these are some of the things they're responsible for. They're essentially the corporate scrum masters, right? They remove major impediments. They own the transformation backlog. They're responsible for making sure that good scrum or good agility is happening in the organization. They eliminate waste, and they collect metrics so they can adjust the organization based on what they see. They can attack problems based on where the cycle time delays are, where the bottlenecks are in the organization. That's kind of their responsibility. And these are, I mean, the company I just finished coaching, the executive action team, actually it's these folks here. The VP of HR is here, the VP of Agile Transformation, the VP of Purchasing, the Senior Director of the Project Management, and the VP of Development or Engineering are this group of people. And they would get together every day for 15 minutes to do a daily scrum, and usually for an hour to collaborate together on the work. This board behind them is actually their scrum board, right? It has the red things are impediments that they're currently working on. The yellow Post-its are other organizational changes that they're making. The space, now, of course, they're doing it remotely now, but when we started working with them, they were in this open space. This is, see, the kitchen is right behind them. This is a big open space, and people in the organization can actually watch them work while they work on the transformation. It's amazing to see that happen. Now, talked about good Scrum, and when I started with them, and what I start with most senior teams is say, okay, you want to bring Scrum and Agile into your organization, that's fine. I want you to know what you're getting yourself in for, right? I want you to read the Scrum Guide. I want you to really pay attention to those things in the Scrum Guide that talk about authority, that talk about who has the authority and responsibility to get stuff done, right? Like there's a line in the Scrum Guide, even the new Scrum that talks about that the product owner owns the ordering of that backlog. If you want to change the ordering of that backlog, I don't care who you are, you need to convince the product owner. So if the CEO wants to change the order of the backlog, he needs to convince the product owner to do it. Now, it's probably going to be fairly easy for the CEO to convince him, but it still has to be a conversation. They still need to do that. They can't do it by fiat, right? That's really the notion there. And there's a line in at least the previous Scrum Guide, I'm not sure if it's in this new one that just came out, that says that no one tells a development team how to take product backlog items and convert them into working functionality. No one, not even the Scrum Master, could tell them to do that. The developers own that. And I want them to be very clear that what they're signing up for is a distribution of authority within their organization. If they don't do that, they will not get the benefits that they are hoping to get out of the transformation. Remember I talked about the decision latency? Well, unless you're going to let that product owner make a decision, then your decision latency will go up, because the product owner can make a decision in minutes because they're with the team. They're working very closely. They see what's going on with the product. They can work directly with their stakeholders, show them during sprint reviews what's going on. They can make that decision quickly, which strongly increases the probability of success for a project. So if they're not willing to do that, then I'll walk away, because you're not going to do Scrum well. And I don't want to waste your money or my time. making this work. So unless you're really serious about this, it's important. The second thing I tell them is Scrum is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve your problems. It doesn't have the answers to how you do write better software. It does not. What it's really good at, though, is making your problems transparent, making them visible. It shines a light into every dark corner of your company to find out where the waste is. That's what it's good at. And your job, particularly the executive action team's job, is to go clean that stuff up, eliminate those problems, get rid of that bureaucracy, get rid of that waste so that the organization can move faster, because those policies are not helping you. I remember a line that Ken Schwaber once told me about bringing Scrum into your organization. It's a lot like asking your mother-in-law to move in with you. She may love you, but she will point out all your flaws. Right? So now the executive MetaScrum. So once we have kind of the executive action team in place and the team's working well, we have to make sure we prioritize the work so the teams are working on the right stuff. And that's really what the executive MetaScrum is about. Making sure that the vision is clear, what we're trying to accomplish, making sure the priorities are clear, eventually change how they do funding of projects so that if they fund Scrum teams and they order backlog so that teams can pull backlog. That's what you're trying to do, is create a pull system in your organization. But initially, when you first start off, you just want them to take every project and list it out. With two different companies I work with, they discovered so much dark work in their organization that they actually were able to save a lot of money by stopping these kind of projects that weren't successful at all. Because in large organizations, there's so much work going on, mainly because here's what happens. People focus on the wrong type of efficiency. So how many people work with managers who say that we want an efficient organization? We want our people to be efficient. What they normally mean there is they want to optimize around resource utilization, right? They want to keep people busy. They don't want people just sitting around doing nothing. So what happens? Well, in most organizations, if you're only going to work on 10, let's say you're going to work on 10 projects in an organization, right? You're going to find that there's some parts of the organization that has nothing to do with those 10 projects right now. So the managers want to keep them busy. So what do? They start a couple more projects to keep them busy. So now we have 12 projects in the organization. And then some other things get stuck, and then people are done with their pieces. They move on, and now they have nothing to work on. So those managers start a couple more projects, put more work in. And then eventually you'll have so many projects going on that people are assigned to 2 or 3 different projects in order to move things forward. Because now people become freed up. Other people are done with their work and they need other people to help them, but they're already on projects that have been just newly created. So there's all this dependency that starts to happen, and it starts to really slow the organization down, right? So what we want to do is we want to make sure we prioritize this, we find all that dark work and we eliminate it, or at least lower its priority so we can focus the organization. And that's what this group, the Executive MetaScrum, does. And in the network, what the executive action team and the MetaScrum are trying to do is create a minimum viable bureaucracy. Minimum viable bureaucracy that is enough structure so that agility can happen and not chaos. So they define a good definitions of done that includes quality, some good standards, DevOps tools, whatever it is that's necessary in order to create just enough bureaucracy and sign-offs so that we know we're building high quality, consistent product, but not so much that it basically falls into bureaucracy and it takes forever to get anything out the door. Okay, and we do this iteratively and incrementally through this continuous improvement model where let's find the bottleneck. Let's eliminate the bottleneck. There's always going to be a bottleneck. So once you eliminate that bottleneck, something else becomes the bottleneck. Something that constrains the overall throughput of the organization. That's from Theory of Constraints by Ellie Goldratt, right? From a book called The Goal and It's Not Luck, and a couple other books that he put out. But that's what you're constantly doing, finding that bottleneck, removing it, finding the next bottleneck, removing it. And if you can't remove it, then how do you get the whole organization working at the beat of the bottleneck so that we don't flood the bottleneck with too much work and create long queues? Because what happens is long queues is what creates unpredictable delivery. Because I mean, you've ever gone to we don't travel as much anymore, but if you go to the TSA, try to go through the gate, and all of a sudden a large flight crew comes in and they cut you off, right? And then you don't know how long it's going to take for you to get through, right? And things just get longer and longer the more of those things happen. So if you happen to go at the wrong time, you can find yourself kind of stuck in line for a long time because it's very unpredictable. This is what happens with a long queue in a company, because you get a long queue, important projects all of a sudden start getting priority, and things that aren't so important keep getting pushed down in the queue. And if you're one of those projects that aren't very high priority, then you don't get a lot of attention, right? So you can't actually move things forward. Make sense? Okay. So what are the steps after you've created those kind of 3 areas? Getting the teams working well, you got the executive action team and the executive MetaScrum working well. Then you got to start thinking about how do we improve the organization. So start by visualizing your value stream, right? What functions, people, parts of the organization need to participate in order to deliver stuff. Those you want in the network. You want them connected in the network. You want to start creating experiments, start improving by creating experiments on how we're going to improve that, figuring out what metrics and measures that you're trying to optimize around. Is it cycle time you're optimizing it around? Is it increasing the feedback loop so we can learn faster? What is it that you're trying to optimize on? So start measuring that and then creating experiments to try to move those measures in the right direction. There's a great technique called the Toyota Kata that we've used in a couple of companies, right? Where you think about your future state, what you're trying to go for, right? Your ultimate target condition. You define where you currently are. You do a gap analysis between the two and decide what is that next step you can take? What's the next target condition we can have? And then how do we create experiments to get to our next target? Just a small step in the right direction. And that's that whole notion of start improving. This one here is about employing a change model of some sort, right? So I kind of pointed to 2 different change models here. The John Carter change model, which is represented by the penguin. I don't know if people have read Our Iceberg is Melting. Fantastic book that talks about change by John Carter and his model. And it's kind of a interesting novel about a bunch of penguins living on an iceberg that starts to melt, and they have to decide that they have to change. And then the elephant here is from a book by the Chip and Dan Heath called Switch. If you're familiar with that, it's another book about change management. I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute, but use some kind of change management model, because if you want to, the whole point of Scrum at Scale is permeating Scrum in the entire organization. And when you're trying to do something in the entire organization, you need to follow some sort of change model so that you can bring people on board. It isn't just going to happen, spontaneously. You have to have a plan. You have to have a way to bring people on board, to lower the resistance, to make it easier for people to accept the change and to adapt to change, and make that change part of the new culture. Okay. And then the last one is about start scaling. And see, I have it near the end, because until you get some of those other things going well, I mentioned earlier that you don't want to scale bad Scrum. You don't want to scale bad practices. So get those going first into a small pilot. That's why it's in this dual operating model. So you create this dual operating model with this network with volunteers that want to opt in to doing this new way of working. this way of working in a Scrum way. Both opt-in executives who are going to clear out impediments for teams and people doing the work. So this is what you want there, and then once you get that going well, now you could start bringing more people into the network and start accelerating the overall transformation. If you accelerate it too fast, what you'll find is things will start getting very difficult, right? There aren't enough coaches that you can bring on board that helps all the teams get better at the same time. So you have some teams doing it well, some teams not doing it well. They need to collaborate with each other, coordinate with each other, and they have a hard time doing that because they're not doing Scrum properly, or they're doing Scrum differently. So there's kind of a mismatch of coordination between these various teams. So what you want to do is get that going well first, and then you start scaling. Okay. Now, let me talk about the Carter model a little bit. So there's the book there, Our Iceberg is Melting. And it really talks about an 8-step model. People familiar with the Carter model?
Yes.
Yeah. It works really well, particularly if you're doing a top-down change initiative. Doesn't work so well with the bottom-up change initiative, but because you need the top-down, you need the senior leadership to start creating this sense of urgency. That first step is that red box there in the corner called increase urgency. You gotta do that because everyone is kind of usually fairly happy in their environment, right? They love their place in the hierarchy. They enjoy the status quo. At least they know it, right? Whether or not it's working great, at least they know it. They don't know this new way of working. Right, that could be scary. That could be something that I maybe can't live with. Right, so the status quo feels comfortable to me. So unless you can raise that sense of urgency, it's really hard to get the momentum, right, the culture to move to something new. So you got to set that. And the last company I was with, their sense of urgency was they had customers telling them that they were becoming their worst supplier, and that they were going to lose their business if they don't change their ways. Okay, and they had enough of those that decided we just can't keep this up, right? We can't predictably deliver to our customers. Our quality is not what it needs to be. We need to change how we do work right now. And that was a CEO saying this. CEO led this transformation. He raised that sense of urgency in the organization and got them moving. Next step is to invite a guiding team, right? And again, I said this network should be a network of volunteers, people who are opting in to do it, because they're the ones who are going to have the energy to make it happen. So including executives. So this is forming that executive action team, forming that executive MetaScrum group, to guide that network. They'll create a vision and a strategy on how we're going to roll things out, how we're going to improve, and then they communicate for buy-in. And you can't over communicate. You got to keep setting out messages in formal ways, informal ways, company meetings, company newsletters. Find ways to continue to communicate the urgency needed and what the vision we're trying to accomplish is. That has to be part of that model. And then empower action. That means removing obstacles. This is what EAT, the executive action team, does: remove obstacles. And recruit a volunteer army of more people from the organization that want to see change, that want to improve things, right? That's what you're looking for, this volunteer army. A couple of companies ago, we had a volunteer army that worked on topics like how do we eliminate the culture of fear? How do we eliminate redundant status meetings? How do we eliminate redundant sign-offs that we have in our process, right? So these are 3 volunteer teams that included people from all over the company trying to get together to actually improve how we're going to get work done. The next one is to plan for and design and create short-term wins. That is, actually think about what projects, what areas can we get a quick win, and start communicating those wins, because that builds momentum, right? If people start, the people who are resisting or kind of on the fence, when they start seeing the wins, and they start seeing people enjoying themselves, and they start seeing things actually happening, that they'll more likely to buy in, right? To get with the program, right? So it's important that you create and communicate those wins quickly. The next step is don't let up. Basically, don't declare victory too quickly. I've seen this happen in a couple of companies where they start their network, they have a nice group of people working it, and they declare victory that we know how to do this, and just say, okay, now we're just going to roll out to everyone else. And they didn't prepare them properly, they didn't train them properly, and then all of a sudden they kind of started falling on bad habits, and they kind of lost their momentum. So it's important that you don't let up, that you continue with the messages, that you continue with the continuous improvement, you keep finding those bottlenecks, you keep cleaning all that stuff up. And then finally, that make it stick is make it part of the culture. Change the performance management system so that the goals include the things that we're expecting Agile teams to do. Include more team-based goals rather than individual-based goals, so that we're actually working as collaborative teams. And organizational-based goals, so that network is all prioritized around the highest level value that the organization cares about, rather than each department's individual goals, which could be in conflict with each other. So the whole point of Make It Stick is really kind of changing the culture around here, changing the phase gate process to be more Agile friendly, to improve a lot of the quality practices, so that the teams are more responsible for quality, that we have more automated testing, more automated checking, more basically fail-proof kind of mechanisms, so that we don't have to have so many sign-offs which slow things down. These are the things that were why is this wanting me? Okay. Okay. So that's the Carter model. Now the next model is the switch model. Now, what the Heath brothers talk about is this metaphor that human beings are like a rider on an elephant, right? The rider is the rational part of the human being, right? The ones who make the decisions, who do the analysis, who decides which way to go. And the elephant is where the energy is, where the momentum is, where, you know, that actually drives you forward. The problem with the elephant, though, is it has a very short attention span, and it's very resistant to anything that kind of scares it, slows it down. Okay. So if you want to change people, and this switch model works really well for grassroots kind of transformation. If you want to change the behavior of people, you got to do three things. You got to direct the rider, which is give very clear direction, so that you can reduce the mental paralysis and analysis that needs to happen by that rider. You need to motivate the elephant, which is normally means find the emotional connection, the why, the purpose behind why we're trying to do this. Something that spurs that elephant forward in you, right? That energy, that drive forward, something that you're passionate about, and making that happen in the organization. And that's what helps people move forward. And then the third thing is you got to shape the path, which is reduce the obstacles, tweak the environment, make the journey downhill so that the elephant has no reason to not move forward. And the book is great. The book is called Switch, and it talks about all different examples on how to make this work. And I've used this very successfully with certain executives that are struggling with the change. Is, use it as a diagnostic model. What are they struggling with? Is it the fact they don't know where to go? Then I give them more clearer directions. If they're struggling with maybe losing their power or whatever else, then we try to find a way to connect to the emotion and the purpose of the organization, and how this is good for them, good for the organization, and good for moving things forward. And if they're really just not clear about what to do, or things are getting in their way, find ways to make the path easier for them. Eliminate redundant steps. Eliminate issues that cause them to stumble on the path. So that's the switch change model. So that's all the kind of the formal material I have for you. If you want to learn more about Scrum at Scale, you can go to this website here. They have case studies, video case studies that you can see how various companies have been successful with this project, with this framework, I should say, rolling out Scrum at Scale in their organization. And there's also a list of classes there. And if you choose to take a class from us, Freestanding Agility, we'll give Agile Rhode Island members 15% off by using the discount code Agile Rhode Island when you sign up, and it'll take $200 off the class. Right now we have none scheduled, but we plan on scheduling some in late January coming up. But I want to leave this out here so that people can see that. So opening up to questions. I know we have a small crowd here today, but what questions do you have? Since I went through that fairly quickly, but I wanted to get through it.
I was interested in the two different hierarchies, right? And you said one was responsible for delivery and one wasn't.
Yeah, one's a hierarchy, one's a network. Yep.
Not the hierarchy. I was thinking that maybe the folks in the hierarchy would be very resistant to give delivery over to the network. Have you run into that?
Occasionally, but often what happens is, see, people in the network still live in the hierarchy. So if you care, as a manager or leader around the delivery of a product, then join the network as a product owner, but act as a product owner, not as a manager. Yep. In other words, your job is to prioritize the backlog, to make sure that we're delivering things with high value. You're not there to tell people how to do their jobs. The developers decide how to do their jobs. Okay. So if that's the thing you care about. Now, if you care about working with teams and standards and making sure of high quality, become a Scrum Master in the network, right? Then you can focus on improving, how work gets done, the definitions of done, things of that nature. Okay. If you just want to tell people what to do, then you have no place in the network. So stay on the hierarchy, and there's some work that's still okay for the hierarchy to do. Bug fixing sometimes is really good there. Support work, right? Because it doesn't require agility per se. In other words, there's more knowns than unknowns in doing this kind of, a lot of work in an organization. So you can still kind of, I don't use the word micromanage with them, but basically if you still like directing work, that's this kind of stuff you can continue to direct. But those projects that require agility, those projects that have more unknowns than knowns, that we need to adapt quickly in order to capture a market, those will go to the network, and you're not responsible for them. Now you're responsible for providing resources that can do the work, clearing obstacles out of their path if they're in the way, but not responsible for actually doing the management of those and the responsibility for the delivery of those projects. The teams, the Scrum teams are. Does that help, Sue?
Yes.
Great. And again, the article in Harvard Business Review called Accelerate by John Carter has a good, concise description of the dual operating model and how it works. He doesn't talk about Scrum because he's not a Scrum guy, but he does talk about agility and what that's about. The book is just an expanded version of the article. And there's also a couple of videos he's done on the dual operating model that can get into more detail in that space. But I find it really helps get past the hurdle in a lot of organizations where middle management tends to be very resistant to bringing in an agile transformation because they don't know what their new job is. And when you introduce the dual operating model, we're actually saying we're not necessarily taking away the hierarchy, right? So you still be a manager of people. It's just that the manager of people is around mentorship, is around growth. It's around improving the skills of those people. It isn't about delivering the project. And if you care about delivering projects, like I said, let's go into the network and take on one of the 3 roles. But now they're called accountabilities in the new Scrum Guide. So, other questions?
Not a question, just a comment. When
Yes,
you were
sure.
saying, did you ever have within companies that people had a hard time making decisions? And I was with one company, none of the C-level people would make decisions
Oh,
because they didn't want it come back to burn them. So they'd send me down to someone else to talk to, and they go, I can't make the decision. He has to, or she has to. And I go, no, they don't want to make it. They want you to make it. And I was always going back and forth. And, even now, early October, we needed a decision made. And I kind of laughed and said, yeah, I'd be surprised if we get that by January. And actually, they did decide last week. So they beat my
they
prediction.
beat your, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Maybe they're learning. No, it's really important. Matter of fact, not making a decision is a decision. But it's not a very useful one typically. It's kind of like a pocket veto, right? Where, yeah, I want to say no, but I don't really want to say no, so I'm just not going to sign the bill, and it'll go away after 20 days, whatever it is. But no, the whole point of the network is, and the Scrum Guide is, it's very clear who makes what decisions on a Scrum team, right? If it's about how we're going to build stuff, that's the team. If it's about what we're going to build in priority, that's the product owner. They make those decisions. If it's about how we're going to clear out, impediments and get people to work better together, that's the Scrum Master. So it's clear who makes the decisions. And that's what I try to make clear to the senior executives is you got to allow the teams to do this, right? This is what brings on, how many people have read or seen the video on Drive by Daniel Pink, right?
Yeah.
It's really good. If you haven't, go look at the video. The video is great. The book is good too, but the video out there based on his TED Talk is really great. It says that knowledge-based workers that get their primary motivation from an intrinsic way by having 3 things be true for them. They need a sense of autonomy. That is, they get to choose. That's why opting into the network is important. They get to choose that they want to do something. So that's number 1. Number 2 is they have a strong sense to become better at things, right? This mastery of this ability to get better. And again, if I'm choosing to work in the network and I'm working with my team continuously improving, I'm getting better at my craft, getting better at my development craft or my product ownership or delivering product, whatever it happens to be, I'm getting better. So it kind of drives that. And the third is being part of a larger purpose, right? And the whole notion of having the purpose-filled organization, strategic vision at the top, making that clear what the vision is, the why, the compelling why of why we're in business, helps connect people to that, to the company mission. And if you can get those 3 things going well, you're going to have an organization that's going to kick butt. Other questions?
I agree, but one of the questions is a lot of times it is cultural. People look to be told what to do.
Yes.
It's hard to break them of that. I don't want to
Yes.
say break them because it sounds like you're doing something wrong, but just to get them used to making their own decisions, or the team. I don't know how many times, Sean, what are we going to do? What are you asking me for? What's the team want to do?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons about opting into the network, right? So if I'm opting in, I'm opting into the new way of working. And when people go in, we teach them what Scrum means. We say that a Scrum team is self-managing team. They decide how much work they pull in. They decide how they're going to get the work done. They manage their own work, right? Now, they also have accountability. They got to show their work at the end of the sprint. They got to accept feedback. They got to stick to the definition of done. They got to make sure they produce high quality, so every freedom has a responsibility, right? So that's what you get. But most engineers I know, once they get into it, they love it because What you need to present to them in a product backlog is not a series of tasks for them to do, but a series of problems or challenges for them to solve. If a backlog item lists a challenge that requires the team to kind of swarm around to solve it, it gets their creative juices flowing, gets their engineering juices flowing. I know when I became an engineer, because I wanted to solve problems, right? That's what I want to do. I didn't want to be told to do a task. That's boring, right? Give me a problem to solve. I'll go solve the problem. Most engineers are like that. How many of you are engineers? Do you feel that for those who are engineers? Don't you want to solve a problem? Right? So once you give them permission to, and then you refuse to actually tell them what to do, because often they'll try to draft you into it. They'll say, should we go left or right? Like you said, Sean, right? What should we do in this case? This is your call, guys. But you know what? We know what's good about Scrum? We get to experiment it for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we get to look at it. And if it was wrong, okay, we lost 2 weeks. But guess what? We learned something and we'll do it better next time. Right? So it's not like you're making a 6-month bet here. You're making a 2-week bet or a 1-week bet if you're using shorter sprints, right? Or a 3-week if you're doing longer sprints. But 2 weeks is intended to be on average with most people nowadays, or most organizations nowadays. That's the bet, right? And then set up the sprints that way. Make the sprint goal an experiment, right? And say, this is what we're trying to learn this sprint. This is what we're going to attempt this sprint. Here's how we're going to know we're successful. That's your sprint goal. You just describe your sprint goal just like that. Here's what we're trying to learn, and here's what we're trying to do to, how we're going to measure success, right? And then in the sprint review, that's what you show, and you get feedback, and you learn from that, and you adjust accordingly. And then once they get into it, most people really start to enjoy it. What they start getting frustrated at is if someone else comes in and tells them what to do, or if they raise an impediment and you don't solve the impediment. That's a problem, which is why you need that executive action team. That's why to do a good Scrum implementation, or any Agile implementation for that matter, never mind Scrum, is you need both the executives and the teams working together in order to make it happen. It can't be completely bottom up. It can't be completely tops down. It has to be both. And you do that by creating the opt-in model in the network. So they're in like a different place. They're not in the hierarchy anymore. They're in a different area where now they see the freedom, they see the flexibility, and they can make it happen. That helps, Sean?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts?
So one thing that I've seen, Doug, is you might get, the C-suite level saying, hey, I've been out there reading, CIO magazine and Harvard Business Review and Agile. That's the thing we got to do, especially this year. And then you have some development teams who say, yeah, we really like that too. We're in. But then you've got, I understand the hierarchy and the active models, but you've got these people kind of trapped in the middle where the C-suite's still saying, send me a report on how the teams are doing. And the teams are saying, we're just doing the work. We'll show you the outcome. But these people in the middle, you kind of have to find a place for them. Do they become product owners? Do they become, part of the HR support team? And for some companies, that becomes an issue. Again, people have been doing things for a long time. And if they aren't given a role, they either rebel against the idea of moving in an agile Scrum of scale, sure, or, they just kind of demand things, send me a report, show me all your burn downs, and I'm going to analyze how they're different from each other. It's like, well, it's not really productive per se.
No, exactly.
So in your experience, how have you kind of worked out some of that, or have you?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So one, the dual operating model helps. Once you describe the dual operating model, you're not taking work or the organization away from them, quote unquote, right? Another thing I've done is with the middle management, I've done this passion exercise with them. I said, well, what are you passionate about? And we'll talk about, are you passionate about product? Are you passionate about standards? Are you passionate about engineering practices? Are you passionate about actual development? Because there are some managers who actually love to get their hands dirty and code. They became managers because that's how they can make more money, right? But they'd really rather code. And so the way we work with them is, if you'd rather code, you're still a manager here where you're mentoring engineers and stuff like that. You're not responsible for project management, quote unquote, because we do that in network, but you join the network as a team member. I've had some managers become team members and actually, just code with the team, become a mentor. Don't boss them around, but teach them to be better engineers. Teach them about, test-driven development or whatever it is that you have passion with, right? So that we can build a better organization. And that's what I found works great. If their passion's around product, become a product owner, right? If I find they have no passion at all, then I just start asking the question, then what's happening here, right? I mean, well, what is it that really gets your juices flowing? And really start having that conversation with them, because anytime you do an agile transformation, you are going to lose 10 to 15% of your workforce, because people sometimes aren't wired to work in an agile way. And okay, you're going to lose some of them, but at least with the dual operating model, you won't have to lose them right away, because they can find work in the hierarchy, right? There's still work that needs to happen there. Still need to do performance reviews. We still need to do, some of the simple repeatable work. We still need to do, stuff like that. And you could do that. And maybe you'll develop passion for something in the network later on. Who knows? Does that help, Doug?
Yeah. Just curious. Yeah, different experiences. Thanks.
Yeah. Other thoughts, impressions? I mean, what did you guys already know about Scrum at Scale, or did this help you? What's?
I'll just throw out a quick question, and
Yeah.
Anybody else, feel free to take yourself off mute at any point, but just keep the conversation. Pick your brain here, Dan. So you described the Scrum at Scale from like the Scrum Inc. perspective, which is a very open, I'd call it, interpretation. And then I think a lot of people might be familiar with a more documented, instructive, safe model, the scaled agile framework.
Very prescriptive, yes.
Yeah, and not that there aren't, levels within scaled agile. I mean, they certainly try to be open to the idea that you could, if you don't need, that prescription throughout, keep it as lean as you can.
Right.
But for a lot of people, the impression of safe is it's many, many layers and a lot of people involved. So from your experience, what have you experienced? What do you encourage? What have you seen work?
Well, I mean, any of these things can work, but again, the reason I like Scrum at Scale is you can actually approach it. And I've done it this way. I've gone into safe organizations where I don't say it's Scrum at Scale, but I do the assessment model. So basically, you take the 12 components and you can assess them on the 12 components. And I don't necessarily say that it's Scrum at Scale. I'm saying and no matter what you do, you have to think about strategic vision. You got to think about prioritizing backlog. You got to think about decomposing backlog into smaller chunks. You got to think about release planning. You got to do all these things. You got to do continuous improvement, impediment removal. These things you got to do. Let's just assess how well they're happening here. If they're happening well, great, wonderful. You don't need any changes. But those areas where you're struggling with, let's figure out a way to clean that up and improve that. And we slowly start migrating them from the prescriptive model that they normally start with. Basically, when you first learn safe, it's training wheels. That's great. I mean, I've had a conversation with Dean about it, and he kind of talks about it as organizational training wheels. It's kind of like a gateway drug for Agile in a large organization, is to bring safe in, right? Because they see their role, their model, and whatever else, but then as they do the continuous improvement loop, as long as you're doing it right, it should improve over time. And Scrum at Scale from the Scrum Inc. perspective, it brings a language to talk about scaling in a way that we can adjust and improve any other kind of scaling model. But SAFE is the predominant one for organizational scaling. I mean, if you look at less is less about scaling an organization. It's more about scaling a product, right? I have 5 teams who need to work on a product, right? You can use less to make that happen, right? The large scale Scrum, right? You can make that happen. They don't talk about the organization. They talk about these teams, and let's reorganize the teams into feature teams, but still it's these teams working together. If you look at Nexus or Scale Professional Scrum from Scrum.org, it's the same kind of thing, right? They don't talk about the organization. They talk about how do we get these teams to work well together. And if you look at how Scrum at Scale talks about how a Scrum of Scrums works together, it's very similar to LeSS and Nexus. But Scrum at Scale goes beyond that. It goes to the organization. It talks about the executive action team. It talks about ways to permeate Scrum in the organization in order to create this scale-free network. And so it's always a great place for me to start as a reference model, no matter where I'm going into the organization, and then building on that. Other questions, thoughts?
I think the dual operating model also works well when you start a transformation. We've found that we've started our transformation within our CIS department.
Yeah.
We can't necessarily tell the business units they need to reorg or restructure,
Right.
but it allows them to have a seat at the table and to be involved in our transformation without
Right.
them feeling like we're telling them that they need to change their departments.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Again, anything you do to lower resistance, right? Because most people want the benefits of agility. They just don't want to necessarily change how they work or lose something that they think is safe and comfortable for them, right? So the more you can lower that resistance, you can bring it in. They could see the benefits. They say we would like to have more of that, and then you can introduce more things into the environment in order to help them move forward on that. Anything else, guys?
Anybody currently in the process of trying to scale, what they're doing? Do the people, on the call who piloted and want to expand?
That's pretty much my job now. We have certain areas where we are doing safe. We have an Agile release train for our Salesforce product, but then we also have a whole bunch of initiatives that we used to call projects that are still ongoing, and they don't fit into an Agile release train because we're still talking about value streams and those. But it does provide that structure to talk about the cross-team dependencies, to get that executive action team in place so that you can have that escalation path. So we're trying a bunch of things out, but
Cool.
right now it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, and actually one size fits all never works at any organization, right? So again, the advantage I see with Scrum Scale is it's not trying to be one size fits all. It's not prescriptive, right? It talks about these 12 things you got to do well, but how you do those things is up to you. And the order you do them in too is up to you, right? For some organizations, it might be changing the delivery model to be more DevOps is the first thing they want to work on. Great, let's work on DevOps, right? Other organizations, it may be prioritization because we don't prioritize anything. That's great. Let's work on prioritization, right? You approach it as needed in order to, again, iteratively and incrementally improve your organization.
The one thing I found that some people misunderstand with Scrum at Scale is when we call it a lightweight framework, they misunderstand what lightweight means, and they think that it's not going to provide as many benefits as like SAFe does. So I don't know if you've encountered that elsewhere.
Not in that way. I mean, typically there are two kinds of organizations that I mean, there's probably more than that, but two general categories, right? One that knows that what they're currently doing isn't working and they want to change, right? In which case, they'll take whatever works, right? And what's nice about something that's less prescriptive is we can start wherever they are, which is where I always like to go as a coach, start where they are and then bring them along, right? Rather than really trying to change them on, completely. Then you have others that they want to do Agile, but they want to be told precisely what to do. In other words, they don't want to do the hard job of learning how to be Agile, right? They just want to install an operating system and expect it just to work, right? And it doesn't tend to work well that way, right? Because they end up installing it and maybe they'll get a 10% improvement, but then it stagnates because they haven't got the Agile thinking. They haven't gotten to the point where this is about experimentation. It's about learning how to do it better. It's about reducing the waste in the organization and improving how we get things done. And if they don't have that mindset, then none of this is going to work, right? So you have to find a way to get that mindset in there. And I find that Scrum at Scale does that a little bit easier than SAFe, because SAFe is more than happy to just say, no, just install this, right? You do this release train engineer, you set up these teams, we do this quarterly planning, you do blah, 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 and it'll just work, right? I mean, some consultants say that. I mean, it always requires work, right? I mean, it doesn't just work. But there are some consultants that will just say that, and people love that, right? And the marketing, I mean, if you look at that big picture, now they have what? Collapsible version of the picture. So if it's too many layers, you can collapse it down to what you think looks good for you. So it's kind of nice. But you can say, oh, we can install that. I mean, we have architects, so that fits. Or we have a DevOps team, so that fits. And we have this, that fits. So they install this thing, but they don't really change anything, right? Except the names, right? The senior project manager is not RTE, right? The product management group didn't have to change anything. They're still called the product management group, right? So, again, they haven't really embraced the whole point of Agile is to be able to change quickly. And to do that, you have to be able to manage through empiricism, make things transparent, measure, find out what's happening, find out what's working, and change accordingly, right? And it's I don't tend to spend a lot of time with those second type of groups. I might go in, I might start working with them, but then if they're not willing to do the things I say, particularly remember that I said earlier, the decision rights, if they're not willing to give the decision rights to the product owners, then I walk away. And SAFe actually took the decision rights away from the product owners. They just took that away, right? I mean, product owners don't have that decision. They're pretty much just business analysts in SAFe, right? I mean, the product decisions are still made by the product managers, not the product owners. And it's like, well, that's not going to work for you because it's going to create that decision latency. You got to go to the product managers. It's going to be more than 5 hours. And look at the data. Data shows that projects fail more often than not when you have this decision latency. You got to look at the Scrum guide and pull this stuff into the teams. Otherwise, you're not doing Scrum. So, I mean, I don't know why SAFe calls that bottom level Scrum if they're going to actually change the accountabilities of the various roles. But that's okay. It works for some people. I don't tend to spend a lot of time in SAFe organizations. I've done 3 or 4, but almost always, teach it more from coach it more from a Scrum at Scale mindset, even though we're using the SAFe framework, if you know what I mean.
Can I challenge that a little bit?
Sure.
You know how there's that decision matrix in Scrum, in SAFe? And
Yeah.
I'm sure it didn't come from SAFe, but basically it says, a decision, a local kind of decision with local effects gets made at the team, but a more broader decision, gets made at a higher level. So
Yep.
sometimes a team decision will affect multiple teams.
Sure.
So it's a group of product owners that need to make that decision, not that
Exactly.
single product owner for the team.
Yep.
Okay. All right, good.
Yep. Well, the key thing though is the whole point of this group of product owners is they have to form a product owner team and get alignment on what we're trying to do.
Right.
Right. And make that happen. If they're all on board, then all the decisions happen locally at the team are in line with what that product owner team said we're heading towards.
Yeah, but there's more latency there when you're getting multiple POs together, as opposed to that one PO being able to make the decision.
Yeah, but the way Scrum at Scale talks about it is that this product owner team is a team. They're going to meet regularly. They're going to have these MetaScrums on a regular basis. They're going to be aligned to what the priorities are. They're going to be aligned on what the purpose is and what the goal is, right? Particularly a shared sprint goal. Matter of fact, I coach them that if you have 4 or 5 teams working on it, let's come up with a shared sprint goal. Make sure we're all aligned in that sprint goal. And then the product owners of their teams can make decisions quickly because they know that their decisions aligned with the goal. They don't have to go bring the whole product owner team together again because they know the decision they're making is within the sphere of what they can make based on the product goal or sprint goal that they came up with.
Yeah,
Okay.
the decisions that make with the most latency in some of these large organizations are those tough decisions. You know, do I put this feature ahead of that one? Do I, deprecate this feature? That kind of stuff.
Yep, and those happen in those MetaScrums, which have to happen at least once a sprint.
Okay.
Hopefully it's more than once a sprint, but at least once a sprint where you're going to look at the backlog. You're going to decide collectively what the current order of that backlog is, because a group of teams, there's one product backlog, not 5. One product backlog, right? The product owner team owns the order of that backlog. During scaled refinement, they refine it together and pull the work that each team is going to do. And then if any coordination needs to happen, we make that coordination quickly, right? So we use tools like Slack and things like that. So we need to make a decision about such and such, goes out to the entire product owner team at once, and then any objections. And we do it through this notion of consent rather than consensus, meaning here's what I intend to do. If you ever read Turn the Ship Around,
Yes.
right? So the product owner who wants to make a decision will say, I intend to blah, 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 right? And here's why. And the only thing that we want to hear back is either very well from a chief product owner or I object because of X, Y, and Z. And what tends to happen is that happens very efficiently, right? Because if everyone's aligned, then that works really well.
Okay.
But you got to teach people these techniques, right? I mean, this doesn't just happen overnight. We're not just going to set up the structure and it happens, right? You gotta coach, you gotta teach them, you gotta understand what authority and decision making means. You gotta actually take them through workshops to align to a product canvas or some technique, story mapping, whatever it happens to be, whatever technique you want to use to align them on what we're trying to create, the order of things, why we're doing it in this order, make sure we're all aligned on that space. And then use that and teach them that intent language so that you're basically saying you're making a decision. And then what we want back from you, from other people, are objections, meaning feedback from me, because I could be wrong, but this is what I'm deciding based on what I know. This is why I intend to do this. Others will tell me whether I missed something. And if I missed something, great. I can change the decision relatively quickly. And again, the worst you lose is 2 weeks anyway, because that team meets at least once a sprint.
So recently I went through the formal training for Scrum and Scale from Scale to Agile. And one of the things they tried to emphasize, because I think they've gotten some pushback, is that at their core, they're still trying to have, the Scrum and everything that Scrumming teaches about Scrum, and then they're trying to just expand it to have a structured framework if people need that. And I think, to your point earlier, Dan, that some people want to have an operating system they can just install and they don't want to do the hard work.
Right.
I think some people see Scrum at Scale as this structure they can just install and don't want to do the hard work of building, the individual teams. Certainly some places do. They start by building the individual teams and then expand out to the structure that then allows them all to work together. And that's great. But other people just see, hey, here's a solution. I can just drop it. And if you don't have those effective teams first, who are really understanding that they need to do a retrospective and they really need to have a goal and, understand how much they might be able to do within a certain amount of time and estimate. They're missing out. So.
Yep. No, that's absolutely true. Often I'll end up doing the fix-up work. They'll call me in. We've been doing this for a year now and it's not working for us, right? And so normally you'll see that kind of a mindset, right? They installed it, they expected it to work. The senior executives saying, "No, this is what the teams do." They don't eliminate impediments. So every impediment gets raised, nothing ever happens with it. So the teams get frustrated. The bureaucracy isn't getting reduced. So how is this getting any better? You're doing what you did before, but now you're frustrating the teams more. You might as well just tell them that we're going to micromanage them again because this is frustrating. Or we can actually start working on improving some stuff. Because again, I use the line about how inviting Scrum into your organization is, isn't a silver bullet. The whole point of it is to make transparent the problems in your organization. Every organization has problems, right? So I'm not saying that your particular organization is more problem, filled than others. There are always things in the organization that we need to improve and make better. This makes it visible so that we can do the hard work of improving the organization, which is, I think, what senior executives should be paid to do, right? Is to make their organizations better. I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive.
A lot of them, I think, are so used to the structure that they have. So when you talk about these dual structures, they're just not willing to accept the new structure because they see it as losing control. So they want to maintain the command and control. I saw a presentation, I think it was General Electric. They had like 1,000 Scrum teams, and they talked about perfectly aligning all the Scrum teams so that their burn downs were all, it was just like you have now recreated the command and control that you always had. And maybe you have a little bit of freedom of, teamwork.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, it didn't come across.
Right. Yep. Well, you did ask in this, how do you make it stick, right? I mean, that's what hold on, here it is. And how you make it stick is you got to teach the mindset of continuous improvement. You got to think the mindset of thinking critically about how the work gets done, coming up with appropriate measures, maybe even using techniques like OKRs or things like that, to start really thinking about what are our objectives and what are the key results that we're looking for, and how do we move towards those key results. Whatever techniques work for you, so that you can use empirical data to make decisions to continuously improve the organization, improve how we do the work, and improve the products themselves. I mean, it's essentially what you're doing. You're taking an agile mindset to the whole organization, not just the product piece. And if you only do it to the product piece, you might get some benefit, but if you're not doing the cleaning up what's around it, you're not going to get a lot of benefit. Like I said, you make it 10, 15, 20% better. Maybe that's good for a lot of companies. I mean, like I remember reading a case study. John Deere had originally implemented Pure Safe all the way through, and they get 20 to 30% better. And that was good. That was like one of their big case studies. But then they said, well, we're kind of stagnant now. We're kind of stuck here. And then they started doing some of the Scrum at scale techniques, and now they've doubled their productivity because they're actually have cleaned up a lot of the stuff that they weren't willing to clean up before. They've changed their mindset into more of an experimental mindset. So again, SAFe was a great training wheel. So that's how Dean Leffingwell originally described it to me as when I talked to him, about it, right? It's a gateway drug to get Agile into large organizations. Great, wonderful. But once you get it in, you got to do the other stuff. And the problem with, again, I don't want to badmouth them. They're doing great, right? But the SPCs they've taken this class to become a SPC, but they don't know that this is just a gateway drug or, a training wheels. They don't know that they have to really teach the organization how to critically look at itself and improve. A lot of the consultants, and a lot of them are really good. So I don't want to paint the broad brush, but some of them who just took the class and think they could be a SAFe consultant are just teaching the prescriptive techniques as opposed to the mindset that Dean talks about, right? I mean, the whole point of the lean house, the house of lean and everything else that we talk about, inside SAFe, some of those consultants really don't understand that stuff. It's sad. But again, many of them are very good. So I don't want to say that they're all that way. lot of Scrum trainers the same way, just regular Scrum trainers or Scrum Scale Trainers too, right? I mean, we have the mix of skills all over the place. But it's but if you really want to make Agile stick, you got to get it into the culture. This whole empirical learning has to be part of the culture, or else it's going to disappear pretty easily.
Can't agree more. Dan, you have a question in the chat. So what is the resource that talks, or actually, Derek, you're still here, right? I hope. Oh,
Hello, can you hear me?
there he is. Yep.
Yep, I'm still here. Yeah, so I think I missed, you might have mentioned the name of a resource that you were citing when you talked about the I intend to language and
Yeah, the book is called Turn the Ship Around.
turn shift around. Okay.
Turn the Ship Around. I forget the author. I should know, but basically it's about a submarine captain who trained for a long time to take over a certain kind of submarine, and then at the last minute was sent to a different submarine, and he didn't know anything about the submarine, so his normal command and control style wouldn't work anymore, and so he learned how to trust his crew, which actually has been trained on the submarine, and started using the I intend to language, and teaching them so that they can be clear about what they intend to do. And he really got to the point where he would just say, very well, right? Because the way he taught it says, okay, I intend to dive to 100 feet. I've checked the radar, or the sonar rather. I've cleared the moorings. I've make sure everyone is off deck and now inside. So we intend to do that, right? So he'll actually explains not only what he intends to do, but why he intends to do it and why he's taken all the appropriate steps. And then he would just say very well if he didn't miss anything. If he didn't miss something, he'd say, well, I didn't hear you say this. Did you check that too? And that's why he's teaching and learning as he goes. And he says, yeah, I've checked it, or no, I haven't. I'll check it now, that kind of thing, to kind of really get that submarine running well. And I guess from the time he took it over, it was one of the worst submarines. It became one of the best submarines while he was there. And it's a great book. And again, I can't remember the author. I should know. You can probably
David Marquette.
Oh, there it is, David Marquette. That's it. Yep. Yep. Thank you, Doug. But it's a fantastic.
Yeah, he actually, sorry. The one thing that I found really interesting about that is he, the only decision making that he kept was when to hit the button, or, to blast the torpedoes, right?
That's it.
Otherwise, he just delegated all decision making, trusting his team and the people on the ship to do work.
Yep. It almost acted like, like pair programming might be, right? It's like, when two people were working with each other, they'd say to each other, I intend to do such and such. So they could check each other's work as they went along, just like pair programming might work in programming, where there's a navigator and a driver kind of, they check in the work as you go kind of thing. So it's pretty true.
On submarines generally, about the pair programming, the decision to launch is there are two people who have keys and they have to concur.
Yeah, particularly, launch the nukes. The torpedoes, they can still one person do it, but I think it's the nukes that they have to do the two keys, right?
You want to think twice. Yeah.
Yes, no, absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan, this has been great. Oh, go ahead, Sue, sorry.
Yes, just wondering, is there any more questions, or is it time to wrap up? Okay, well, thank you very much, Dan.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Very enlightening.
Thanks so much.
Our next presentation is on January 19th. And Steve Voles is going to talk about cultivating lean agile leadership, helping command and control leaders make the switch. Steve is the Chief Enablement Officer at the 334 group. So I hope to see everyone on January the 19th. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Dan. Nice job.
Nice
Thank
job, yes.
Thanks.
Very interesting.
Hope you learned something.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Bill Donaldson, is that you? I mean, are you here? You the same Bill Donaldson that I know from earlier in my career? I don't know if he's there because he says he's there, but.
Suppose he's on mute, but
All right. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Hope it wasn't too academic. I wasn't trying to be too academic, but
No, it was perfect. It
Oh,
was great.
wonderful.
Just, appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
you're very welcome.
Hopefully we'll see you around.
Yes.
Zoom,
yes.
Zoom for now anyway, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully with your new setup, I can come more often because with the old setup, I lost the link a couple of times or it didn't get sent to me. And it was like, ah.
Oh, no.
think,
Sorry. Yeah, no,
yeah.
I think the meetup's working better.
I've had problems with Eventbrite with other, efforts as well. They kind of bury, they're like 5 layers to get to the actual link in a secret email. And whereas Meetup, it's like once you've registered, you kind of go back and there it is.
There's
There it
the
is.
link. Yeah.
Right at the top. Yeah.
I'm actually considering just keeping the same link. So even if you go into last month's link, you can still get here. But
Yeah.
we're learning and adapting, right?
We're learning and adapting, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna log off.
Oh.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening.
All right. Bye.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yes, you too.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dan. You too.